I watched humans rush into war, and understood why the universe itself hesitates. Stood at the observation window and watched the stars. He had been watching stars for 3,000 years. That was his purpose. That was all he had ever done. They did not fight. They did not build empires. They did not trade or negotiate or argue. They only watched and recorded. Every war, every peace, every rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy, they wrote it all down. They were the memory of the universe. Had seen species born and species die. He had watched proud empires crumble to dust. He had recorded the screams of dying worlds and the silence that followed. Nothing surprised him anymore. Nothing moved him. He was old, even by standards, and his heart had grown as cold as the void between stars. For the past 300 years, his assignment had been humanity. He remembered when they first appeared on the galactic stage, small creatures from a small world, loud, emotional, short-lived. They burned through their brief existences with a strange intensity that other species found exhausting. The Galactic Council had tolerated them. Some had them. A few had laughed at them. Had simply watched. He watched them spread to new worlds. He watched them build and break and build again. He watched them fight among themselves and then unite against common enemies. He recorded everything with the cold precision of his kind. Today, he stood in the observation station above a neutral moon, waiting for the council session to begin. His long fingers rested on the railing, and his ancient eyes reflected the distant glow of a nebula. The alarm came without warning. Red lights flashed across the station, turned slowly, the never hurried, and accessed the emergency transmission. His eyes moved across the data, and for the first time in perhaps a century, he felt something stir in his chest. The swarm had crossed into populated space. Every species in the galaxy knew they were not an army, they were not an empire, they were hunger given form. 1 billion creatures moving as one mind, consuming everything in their path. Planets, stations, ships, nothing survived their passage. 11 civilizations had fallen to them in recorded history. 11 species had been erased from existence. And now they were heading toward the cluster. Accessed more data. His expression did not change, but the stirring in his chest grew stronger. They were heading towards 7. A colony world, mixed population, over 100,000 beings from a dozen species. 40,000 of them were human. The council session began within the hour. Observed from his designated position, always watching, never speaking. The great chamber filled with representatives from 100 worlds. Their voices rose in argument and fear. The elders presented their calculations. The numbers were absolute. They would reach 7 in 6 standard days. Evacuation ships could not arrive in time. Military reinforcement would take 12 days at minimum. The mathematics allowed no hope. 7 was lost. Watched the reactions around the chamber. Some species wept, others raged. A few simply fell silent, accepting the inevitable. They recorded it all. Then's eyes found the human ambassador. Her name she was small, even by human standards. Dark hair pulled back from a face that showed the lines of age and worry. She had served as ambassador for 15 years, a long time by human measure, barely a heartbeat too. He expected to see despair on her face, perhaps anger, perhaps the numb acceptance that came when hope died. Instead, he saw something else. Her eyes were focused, her jaw was tight, her hands resting on the table before her were steady. Had observed humans for 3 centuries, and he recognized this expression. He had seen it on soldiers before battle. He had seen it on rescue workers before disaster. He had seen it on parents protecting their children. It was not despair. It was decision. 6 days, said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the chamber. That's enough. The other representatives turned to look at her. A warrior laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Enough for what human? Enough to say goodbye. The math does not lie. Your people on that world are already dead. Stood, she looked at the warrior for a long moment, and something in her gaze made his laughter fade. 6 days, she repeated. That's enough time to reach them. She turned and walked toward the exit. The council erupted behind her, voices demanding she stay, demanding explanation, demanding to know what she thought she could possibly do. Did not look back, she did not wait for dismissal, she simply left. Watched her go. Then, moving with unusual speed for his kind, he accessed the human communication networks. What he found made him stop. Across 12 star systems, human ships were breaking orbit. Military vessels, yes, but not only military vessels. Cargo ships, mining platforms, passenger transports, civilian craft of every size and shape. They were not fleeing. They were not hiding. They were moving towards 7. Stared at the data for a long moment. His ancient mind processed what he was seeing, and for the first time in 3,000 years, he could not make sense of it. The humans knew the math. They knew the odds. They knew that reaching 7 meant facing the swarm with inferior numbers, inferior technology, and almost no chance of survival. They were going anyway. Leaned back from his console. His hands trembled slightly, an almost forgotten sensation. He looked out the observation window at the stars and wondered if perhaps, after 3 of watching, he had missed something important about this strange, short-lived, impossibly stubborn species. I watched humans rush into war, and understood why the universe itself hesitates. Had observed many things in his long life. He had seen great fleets gather for conquest. He had watched empires mobilize their armies with precision and order, every ship in its place, every soldier following commands, everything logical, everything controlled. What the humans were doing was nothing like that. He sat at his observation console and watched the chaos unfold across 12 star systems. There was no order. There was no central command. Ships were launching from every port, every station, every colony world where humans lived, and they were not warships. A cargo freighter named the Bright Morning broke orbit from a trading station near the border. Its captain was a man named, accessed his file, 52 years old, no military experience. He transported grain and machine parts between colonies. His ship had no weapons. Its shields were designed to stop small debris, not enemy fire. Had been scheduled to deliver supplies to a mining colony. Instead, he changed course towards 7. When the station controller demanded an explanation, his response was simple. My daughter lives there. Her name is, she is 7 years old. The transmission ended. The Bright Morning accelerated toward the gathering fleet. Recorded the exchange, then he found another. A young woman named had been training at the Human Military Academy for 3 years. She was 2 weeks away from graduation. Her scores were excellent. Her future was bright. She was supposed to wait for assignment like every other cadet. She did not wait. Broke into the academy hangar at night. She took a training vessel, a small fighter with basic weapons and thin armor. When her instructor discovered the theft, he filed a formal complaint with Academy Command. Then he walked to the hangar, took another training vessel and followed her. Watched the data stream across his screen, story after story, ship after ship. A retired admiral named came out of retirement and took command of an old destroyer that should have been scrapped years ago. A medical transport captain named loaded her ship with supplies and volunteers. A group of miners pooled their money, bought an old warship from a scrapyard, and spent 2 days making it fly again. None of them were ordered to go, none of them were forced, they simply went. Tried to understand. He ran calculations. He analyzed patterns. He searched for the logic that must be driving this behavior. Self-preservation was the most basic instinct of any species. Every creature in the galaxy knew how to recognize a losing battle. Every species knew when to run. The humans were running, but they were running toward the danger, not away from it. He accessed more communications. A mother saying goodbye to her children before boarding a volunteer ship. A brother and sister arguing about who would stay home to care for their elderly parents. Both wanted to go, neither wanted to stay. An old man with shaking hands climbing into a fighter cockpit because he had been a pilot 50 years ago and still remembered how to fly. One transmission made pause. A young man named was speaking to his wife through a video link. He was aboard a small patrol ship, part of a group heading toward the gathering fleet. His wife was crying. Their baby was asleep in her arms. "I know," said softly. "I know, but there are children on that world, there are families. If I don't go, who will?" His wife wiped her eyes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Come back to us," she said. "I will try." The transmission ended. Sat in silence. The observation station hummed around him, quiet and cold. He had watched species go to war for territory. He had watched them fight for resources, for power, for revenge. He understood those things. They made sense. This did not make sense. He contacted the council and requested guidance. The elders responded within minutes. They wanted to know if humanity had developed a secret weapon, something hidden from galactic surveys, something that could explain why they were throwing themselves against an enemy they could not defeat. Considered the question carefully. He reviewed all his data. He examined every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology the humans were bringing to this fight. Then he sent his response. "I do not believe they have a secret weapon. I believe they are simply unwilling to let others die alone." The council did not reply. The human fleet gathered at a rendezvous point 3 light-years from 7. Counted the ships. 412 vessels. Only 83 were actual warships. The rest were cargo ships, transports, mining vessels, passenger liners, anything that could fly and carry people or weapons. Against them the swarm numbered in the thousands. There were living weapons, grown for destruction. They had consumed 11 civilizations. They had never been stopped. Calculated the odds. The humans had perhaps a 3% chance of even reaching 7 before being destroyed. Their chance of successfully evacuating the colony was less than 1%. Their chance of surviving the battle was too small to measure. He recorded his observation. The humans appear fully aware that they cannot win. They are proceeding regardless. This behavior contradicts all known models of species self-preservation. I do not have an explanation. The fleet began to move. Watched the ships accelerate toward the jump point. He saw the bright morning among them, the cargo freighter with no weapons and a captain whose only thought was of his 7-year-old daughter. He saw a stolen training vessel, flying in formation with her instructor's ship. He saw the old destroyer commanded by the retired admiral, its engines burning bright despite their age. Something stirred in his chest. He did not recognize the feeling. It was strange and uncomfortable, like a muscle that had not been used in centuries suddenly coming to life. He found himself standing. He did not remember deciding to stand. Ambassador's ship was at the head of the fleet. She had not asked anyone to follow her. She had simply announced that she was going and left. And now 400 ships flew behind her. Made a decision. It was the first real decision he had made in perhaps 1,000 years. He sent a request to the council. He asked permission to follow the human fleet to 7. He wanted to observe the battle directly. He wanted to record what happened with his own eyes. The council approved his request. They reminded him that his role was to watch, not to participate. He was to remain at a safe distance. He was to record everything. He was not to interfere. Acknowledged the instructions. Then he boarded his small observation vessel and set course for 7. As his ship entered faster-than-light travel, he looked back at the human fleet one last time. 400 ships against thousands. Cargo freighters against. Farmers and miners and pilots against a swarm that had devoured worlds. They were going to die. knew this with absolute certainty. But as he watched them fly toward the darkness, he realized something else, something that made the strange feeling in his chest grow stronger. They were not afraid. Or perhaps they were afraid, but they were going anyway. And somehow, that seemed more important than all the calculations in the universe. I watched humans rush into war, and understood why the universe itself hesitates. The first thing saw when he arrived at 7 was fire. They had already reached the outer defense stations. There filled the void like a living storm, thousands of dark shapes moving with terrible purpose. The human fleet had arrived just hours before them, and now the space around the colony world burned with the light of battle. Positioned his observation vessel at a safe distance and began recording. His instruments captured everything, every explosion, every transmission, every ship that died in the darkness. The humans were not trying to win. He realized this almost immediately. They were not charging at the fleet. They were not attempting some desperate attack. Instead, they had formed a defensive line between the swarm and the planet, and behind that line, something else was happening. Evacuation. Every transport, every freighter, every ship with room for passengers was landing on 7. They were loading civilians, humans and aliens alike, and launching back into space, trying to escape before they broke through. Watched a cargo ship descend through the atmosphere. Its hull was scorched from enemy fire. One of its engines was damaged, but it landed anyway in the middle of a burning city, and its cargo doors opened wide. Aliens ran toward it, families, children, species that had laughed at humanity in the council chambers. They ran toward the human ship because it was their only hope. The ship filled in minutes. Then it launched, struggling toward orbit on its damaged engine. A fighter moved to intercept it. A human destroyer placed itself in the path. Recognized the ship. It was the old vessel commanded by the retired admiral. Its shields were failing. Its weapons were outdated. It had no chance against the fighter. The destroyer opened fire anyway. It drew the enemy's attention. It bought the cargo ship 30 seconds, just enough time to reach the jump point and escape. Then the fighter tore the destroyer apart. Recorded the death of Admiral and his crew, 214 humans, gone in an instant, but behind them 3,000 civilians escaped into faster-than-light travel. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. Human ships threw themselves at the not to kill, but to delay. Every minute they bought was another transport launching. Every sacrifice meant more lives saved. A transmission came through sensors. A woman's voice, calm despite the chaos around her. "This is Field Medic. I'm in Shelter 7. We have 40 wounded. I need an evacuation ship at these coordinates." Traced the signal. Shelter 7 was in the middle of the heaviest fighting. Ground forces had already landed in that sector. The streets were filled with the creatures, pale, eyeless things that moved like water and killed like fire. No ship responded to his call. They were all too far away. Watched his sensors. He saw Life Sign moving through the shelter. She was organizing the wounded. She was preparing them for transport that might never come. A civilian transport changed course. It was already full, 200 passengers packed into a ship designed for 100. But its pilot, a young man named, had heard the transmission. "Shelter 7, this is Transport Mercy. I'm coming to you, hold on." The transport dove toward the planet. Fighters pursued it. 2 human fighters broke formation to provide cover, and both were destroyed within seconds. But the transport made it through. It landed hard, cracking its landing struts, but it landed. Watched Life Sign. She was carrying the wounded out of the shelter one by one. She was loading them onto the transport while forces closed in around her. The transport filled. It was overloaded. It could barely lift off. But it launched anyway, clawing toward the sky with engines screaming. Was not on board. Her transmission came one last time, weak and fatting. "Transport Mercy, you are clear. Get them out of here." Then her life sign vanished. Recorded her death. He did not know why his hands were shaking. The battle continued, hour after hour. The human fleet was being destroyed piece by piece, but they did not break. They did not run. Every ship that fell was replaced by another moving to fill the gap. His cargo ship, the Bright Morning, made 7 trips to the surface. 7 times he landed in fire and chaos. 7 times he loaded his ship with civilians. On the 8th trip, his luck ran out. Caught him during descent. But his daughter was on the 3rd transport to escape. She was safe, heading toward human space with 300 other children. Never knew. He died before the confirmation reached him. The young pilot who had stolen her training vessel flew until her ship had no weapons left. Then she flew unarmed, leading fighters away from evacuation ships, using her speed and skill to survive when she had no right to survive. She lasted 4 hours, longer than anyone expected. When her ship finally died, she ejected into space and drifted in the void, waiting for rescue that might never come. Her final transmission was picked up by sensors. She was laughing softly, her voice tired but not afraid. "Got 3 of them, not bad for a cadet." A passing transport detected her signal and changed course to pick her up. She survived. By the 3rd day, half the human fleet was gone. The space around 7 was filled with wreckage and bodies. They were still coming, endless and hungry, but they were slower now. The humans had hurt them. They had made the swarm bleed. And behind the wall of burning ships, transport after transport escaped into faster-than-light travel. Counted the evacuees. 40,000 humans had lived on 7. 31,000 had escaped. 50,000 aliens had lived there too. 47,000 were saved. The humans were dying so that others could live, not just their own people, everyone. His hands stopped shaking. Something else was happening inside him now, something he had not felt in 3,000 years. He did not have a name for it, but as he watched the humans fight and die and save strangers they had never met, he understood that he was witnessing something rare, something precious, something the galaxy had forgotten. They continued their advance. The human fleet continued to fall, but far across the stars, the Galactic Council was watching too. And in the halls of power, on 100 different worlds, beings of every species were asking the same question. If the humans fight like this for strangers, what would they do for those they love? The answer terrified them. I watched humans rush into war, and understood why the universe itself hesitates. The eternal dawn was dying. Watched from his observation vessel as the last human capital ship burned in the darkness. Its shields had failed hours ago. Half its weapons were gone. Fires burned on 3 decks, and emergency teams were running out of time to stop them. Ambassador stood on the bridge. Sensors could see her through the ship's external cameras, a small figure surrounded by chaos, somehow calm in the middle of destruction. 90% of the human fleet was gone. The wreckage of 400 ships drifted in the void around 7. Thousands of humans had died, but behind them, the last evacuation transports were accelerating toward the jump point. In minutes, they would be safe. The humans had done the impossible. They had held the long enough. But there would be no escape for the eternal dawn. The ship was too damaged to run. Its engines were failing. They were closing in from all sides, and there was nothing left to stop them. Knew this, could see it in her face. She was not afraid, but she was tired. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her shoulders. She turned to a console and began recording a message. "This is Ambassador of the Human Federation. I am sending this message to the Galactic Council." Her voice was steady. She looked directly at the camera and felt as though she was looking at him. "We knew the math. We knew we could not win. We came anyway. That is who we are. That is who we have always been." She paused. Behind her, an officer reported that there were 2 minutes from weapons range. I do not ask you to thank us. I do not ask you to remember us. I only ask you to understand. Every life matters. Every person is worth fighting for. That is not weakness. That is the only thing that makes us strong. She ended the recording and sent it. Then she turned back to face where the swarm was growing larger with every second. Recorded everything. His instruments captured every detail of the dying ship, every life sign fading one by one. This was his purpose. This was what he was made to do. But for the first time in 3,000 years, he did not want to watch. The Galactic Council received message within minutes, monitored their communications, listening as representatives from 100 worlds argued about what to do. Most wanted to do nothing. The humans had made their choice. The battle was lost. There was no point in throwing more lives away. But some voices disagreed. The Dominion was the first to speak. They were warriors. They had conquered a dozen worlds in their history. They respected nothing except strength. Their war leader stood in the council chamber, his massive form casting a shadow across the floor. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. I have mocked the humans, he said. I have called them weak. I have laughed at their short lives and their soft bodies. He paused. The chamber was silent. I was wrong. He turned to face the council, his eyes burning with something that might have been shame. The humans are dying to save people they have never met. Aliens, strangers, beings who would not lift a finger to help them, and they are not running. They are not begging for mercy. They are standing in the fire and refusing to move. His hand slammed against the podium. If we let them die alone, we do not deserve to call ourselves warriors. We do not deserve to call ourselves anything. The war leader sent the order. Every ship in the Dominion began moving towards 7. The Communion spoke next. They had not waged war in 1,000 years. They were pacifists. They believed that violence was always wrong. But their elder stood in the council chamber, tears streaming down her ancient face, and gave an order that had not been given in 10 centuries. Release the defense systems, she said, all of them. Across space, ancient weapons activated. Ships that had been sleeping for 1,000 years came to life. They were old, but they were powerful, and they were moving. One by one, other species joined. The species that had never agreed on anything suddenly agreed on this. The humans could not be allowed to die alone. And then the council sent a message too. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood. They did not fight, they did not interfere, they only watched. But today, they were breaking their oldest rule. Provide tactical data to the coalition fleet, the message said. Share all navigation information. Help them reach 7 in time. Stared at the words. His people had observed for millions of years. They had never taken sides. They had never helped anyone. Until now. He began transmitting. His observation vessel became a beacon, sending navigation data and tactical information to every ship racing towards 7. The archives contained knowledge of every route, every shortcut, every way to move faster through space. Shared it all. On the bridge of the eternal dawn was preparing to die. They were in weapons range. They were opening their terrible mouths, preparing to consume the last human vessel. Then her communications officer shouted, Ambassador, we're receiving transmissions. Multiple contacts dropping out of faster than light, hundreds of them. Turned to her eyes went wide. Ships were appearing all around 7, warships bristling with weapons, vessels ancient and strange, cruisers, destroyers, ships from a dozen species all arriving at once. And they were opening fire on the swarm reeled. For the first time in recorded history, they were caught by surprise. They had expected easy prey. They had expected a dying fleet and a helpless world. Instead, they found an army. The coalition fleet tore into the with fury that surprised even. The fought like they were trying to prove something. The fought like they were making up for 1,000 years of silence. Species that had been enemies for centuries fought side by side, united by something none of them could name. Watched from the bridge of her dying ship, her crew was cheering. Some were crying. She stood in silence, her hand resting on the console, and watched the galaxy come to save them. A transmission came through. It was the war leader, his voice rough but warm. "Human ambassador, your ships have earned their rest. Fall back, we will take it from here." Was quiet for a moment, then she laughed, a soft, tired sound. "Took you long enough." The Eternal Dawn limped away from the battle. Its engines were failing, its hull was cracked, and half its crew was wounded, but it was alive. Behind it, the coalition fleet drove the back into the darkness. Watched it all, he recorded every moment, but he was not just observing anymore. He had helped. He had chosen a side. But would never be the same after this. Neither would the galaxy. And neither would. He looked at the ships fighting together, species that had never trusted each other, never worked together, never cared about anyone but themselves. The humans had changed them, not with weapons, not with power, with sacrifice. Finally understood what the humans had known all along. Some things were more important than survival. Some things were worth dying for. And sometimes, watching was not enough. I watched humans rush into war, and understood why the universe itself hesitates. They were broken. It took 3 more days of fighting, but in the end the swarm retreated into the darkness between stars. They were not destroyed. They could never truly be destroyed, but they were wounded. It would take them centuries to recover if they ever did. For the first time in galactic history, the swarm had been stopped. Stood on the surface of 7 and looked at the sky. It was filled with ships, coalition vessels from a dozen species, all working together to bring supplies and help rebuild. The air smelled like smoke and rain, and the ground was with the marks of battle. But the world was alive. 7 had survived, not whole, not unscarred, but alive. The memorial ceremony was held on the 3rd day after the battle ended. It took place in a field outside the capital city, where the grass had been burned away by weapons fire. Now, the ground was covered with flowers, brought by survivors, by rescuers, by strangers who had never set foot on this world before. Thousands gathered for the ceremony. Humans stood beside aliens they had never met. Warriors who had once mocked humanity now stood with their heads bowed. Elders wept openly, making no effort to hide their tears. Species that had been enemies for generations stood side by side and shared their grief. Watched from the edge of the crowd, he was still observing. It was all he knew how to do, but something had changed inside him. The cold distance that had protected him for 3,000 years was cracking, and he did not know how to stop it. He did not know if he wanted to stop it. The names of the dead were read aloud. It took hours. Human names, alien names, soldiers and civilians, pilots and medics, captains and crew. Each name was spoken clearly, each life honored. Admiral, who had given his ship to save a cargo transport full of strangers. The field medic who had refused to leave until every wounded person was evacuated. The cargo captain who had died, never knowing his daughter was safe. Hundreds more, thousands more. When the names were finished, Ambassador stepped forward to speak. She looked different than she had in the council chamber. Older, tired, but there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, a quiet strength that came from having walked through fire and survived. "We did not come here to win," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the silent crowd. "We came here because it was right. We came here because someone needed help and we could give it. That is all." She paused. Her eyes moved across the crowd, finding faces she knew and faces she had never seen. "Some people will call us heroes. We are not heroes. We are just people who could not stand by and watch others die. Every species here today has that same capacity. Every being in this galaxy has the ability to choose courage over fear, sacrifice over safety, love over survival. She smiled, and there was sadness in it, but also hope. We showed you who we are. Now show us who you can be. The ceremony ended in silence. There were no cheers, no celebrations, just a quiet understanding that passed between everyone present. Something had changed. The galaxy would never be the same. Later, as the crowds began to leave, found himself walking toward the memorial. He did not know why. His feet moved on their own, carrying him forward until he stood before the wall where the names of the dead were carved. He reached out and touched the stone. It was cold under his fingers. He had watched death before. He had recorded the fall of civilizations, the extinction of species, the end of worlds. He had observed it all with perfect detachment, never allowing himself to feel anything. But now, standing before this wall, he felt everything. He felt grief for the humans who had died. He felt shame for all the years he had spent watching without acting. He felt hope for what the galaxy might become now that it had finally learned to stand together. And he felt something else, something he had not felt in 3,000 years. He felt alive. A hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find Ambassador standing beside him. She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see everything, his age, his pain, his transformation. "You helped us," she said quietly. "The navigation data, the tactical information, that was you." Nodded slowly, "Yes." "Why? Your people never interfere. It is against everything you believe." Looked back at the memorial wall. The names of the dead stretched across the stone, thousands of lives carved into permanence. "I watched you fly into certain death for people you had never met," he said. "I watched you sacrifice everything for strangers. I have observed the galaxy for 3,000 years, and I have never seen anything like it." He paused. His voice, when he continued, was thick with emotion he barely understood. "You reminded me of something I had forgotten, something the universe itself seems to have forgotten, that some things are more important than calculations, that some moments demand action, not observation, that watching is not enough." Was quiet for a long moment, then she reached out and took his hand. "Would you like to stand with us?" she asked, not as an observer, as a friend. Looked at her. He looked at the memorial. He looked at the sky, where ships from a dozen species were working together to rebuild a world they had almost lost. 3,000 years of watching, 3,000 years of distance, 3,000 years of cold, perfect detachment. It ended with a single word. "Yes." He walked toward the others. Humans and aliens all mixed together. Was there, the young pilot who had stolen her training vessel and survived against impossible odds. She was standing with her instructor, both of them alive when they had no right to be. A warrior stood nearby, his massive hand resting on the shoulder of a human child. An elder sat in the grass, surrounded by children of every species, telling stories about bravery and hope. Found a place and sat down. She looked up waiting. He hesitated. For 3,000 years he had stood apart. He had watched. He had recorded. He had never been part of anything. But that was the who had forgotten that watching was not living. He sat down beside. The grass was soft beneath him. The sun was warm on his skin. Around him, voices rose in conversation and laughter, the sounds of a galaxy learning to heal. He was not watching anymore. He was present. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the ancient observer finally understood why the universe itself hesitates when humans enter a room. It was not fear. It was awe. Because humans reminded the cosmos of something it had lost long ago, something precious, something powerful. The understanding that love was stronger than death. That sacrifice meant more than survival. That the willingness to fight for others, not for yourself, but for strangers, for aliens, for beings you would never meet, was the highest form of strength the universe had ever known. Closed his eyes and let the warmth wash over him. He had finally learned what it meant to be alive. And inspired them. Turned back to his console and began to record. In the darkness of space, human ships began to gather, and the eternal observer found himself unable to look away.